Hello, my name is Barbara Kay, and on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, I'd like to welcome you to our program, MOSAIC. Our special guest on MOSAIC today is Dr. Matt Levitt. He is the Senior Director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. We'll be back with Matt after this brief message.
When I was young, I went to Jewish summer camp, traveled to Israel, and participated in leadership development groups. Today I'm teaching my children that being part of the Jewish community helps keep our heritage and traditions alive and vibrant, and can be fulfilling, exciting, and fun.
At the age of 90, I started a second career, delivering meals to homebound seniors. Because I'm a senior myself, I know how tough it can get. If somebody is in trouble and needs help, we need to be there for them. As Jews, it's who we are. It's what we do.
When my family needed help, we turned to the Federation, and they were there for us. How good it was for us to know that we are not alone.
Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
Welcome to MOSAIC. It's
Thanks
such
for
a
having
pleasure,
me.
Dr. Levitt. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure's mine.
Listen, Senior Director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, you have a specific role, though. You're with the MOSAIC program, Mike Stein program. Would you share that program with us?
Of course. The Stein program on counterterrorism and intelligence is named for Mike Stein. It was first in honor of him by many of our founders in recognition of his work as one of the original founders of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Our program focuses on counterterrorism issues and intelligence issues related to the U.S. and U.S. policy towards the Middle East. As part of the whole Institute's function, focused solely on U.S. policy towards the Middle East. There are lots of think tanks around, lots of good places. Most of them do a whole lot more than we do. We have a niche area. We take all of our energies and focus just on U.S. policy towards the Middle East. And by the way, we don't have a whole lot of extra time on our hands, from Tunisia and Africa, Egypt and North Africa, to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. There's a tremendous amount going on, tremendous need for education on these issues. We're a nonpartisan think tank, so we work with all parties. There's never a day after an election where we are more or less relevant, because these are issues that are bipartisan issues that directly affect U.S. interests in the Middle East, and because of the importance of the Middle East around the world.
Yeah, you have some very, very prestigious people working for you. As a matter of fact, the government, the United States government, takes people and pulls them away from you, puts them to work in the government because they're so talented, so knowledgeable, and they respect them so much.
It's happened a few times.
Yeah, just recently, David Makovsky, who is he? He's involved now with Kerry, isn't he?
With Martin Indyk.
Oh, with Martin Indyk.
David Makovsky is the director of our program on the peace process, and he's now on a one-year leave working for Martin Indyk's team on the peace process.
Yes, but who pulled him out, really? Was it Martin Indyk or...
Well, Martin works for Kerry.
Kerry, yeah. I think that's quite amazing.
It is amazing, and it's happened to a whole bunch of us. I started my career at the FBI after having been at the Institute, got pulled away from the Institute to go to the FBI, later came back to the Institute. We founded this Stein program on counterterrorism and intelligence, and then I got pulled back into government to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence at the Treasury Department, and now I'm back at the Institute again. Yeah. Some might say I just can't hold down a job.
I rather doubt that. You just got a grant, a fellowship, I understand, for the next year.
We did. We just got, I'm now the Fromer Wexler Fellow at the Washington Institute.
Which is very, very prideful.
It's a great honor.
It's terrific. But let me ask you, how does it literally work? How does the Washington Institute really work? I mean, you know, we're going to talk about a book that you wrote that's sensational, but we'll wait till the end. Toward the end, I want people to understand the depth and extent of how it works, literally.
Well, there are too many people out there today who are trying to understand the world in our case, the Middle East, by doing research by Google, by sitting at their computer and by
Yeah,
watching
that's so true.
news shows. At the Washington Institute, we go out and we do primary field research in the Middle East, but all over the world related to the Middle East. I just got back from Australia and New Zealand, meeting with officials there on all these issues of shared interest, in particular, given current events, what's going on in Syria, the flow of foreign fighters from around the world, from the United States, from Australia, and especially from Europe to go fight in Syria. Some of these people are coming home and are posing threats at home. And then, of course, you have on the other side of the conflict Hezbollah, which we'll talk about in a minute, fighting alongside the Assad regime. We go out, we do research, we conduct interviews, we collect primary source documents, and then we come back and we do analysis, meet with officials here, and provide educational materials, provide policy briefs, really everything from policy briefs to op-eds to peer-reviewed journal articles, books, the whole gamut, to try and create a foundational base of knowledge about the issues that are affecting U.S. policy towards the Middle East, the kind of information you need to be able to make informed decisions.
Yeah, obviously the government has a lot of respect for you because it does use the information that you get together. I mean, it's got to. And the in-depth research that you do has to be extraordinary when you think about it.
Well, it's a lot of fun to do. We enjoy doing it.
As you say, you were in Australia. You just got back.
I did. We meet with foreign governments all the time, but maybe most important is we meet with our own government. We're an American think tank focused on U.S. policy towards the Middle East. And there are lots of other people doing good work on these things. Our unique added value is that we focus only on this issue. This is all we do 24/7. And we spend a lot of time briefing, whether it's the executive branch, State Department, the intelligence community, Congress, on these issues across the aisle, both parties, because at the end of the day, smart U.S. policy on foreign policy issues, in particular the Middle East, this is a bipartisan issue.
Without question. So, and well, yours is a non-biased position, which they can count on, so they don't have to worry about it. You know, last night we had a meeting, and one of the people that spoke was Joe Miller,
Right.
who is with SOCOM. Explain what SOCOM is.
This is U.S. Special Operations Command. So these are the people who not only train and arm with special weapons and tools our special forces, but who also do the strategic planning for things like our war on terror and synchronizing the plans across all the different geographic commands. SOCOM doesn't have responsibility for a particular place, and therefore it can plan internationally for things like combating terrorism, and it can focus on what we call the gaps and the seams, where one command's authorities end and another begins, but things are still happening across those spaces, whether it's movement of money or foreign fighters or what have you.
You know, it's incredible. He presented us with a map, showed what happened a couple of years ago and what's present today in terms of the numbers of people that are involved across the country trying to solve the problems. I mean, this is extraordinary.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity here, and it's not just the country, it's across the world. And it shows you the types of things they're thinking about. They're not only thinking about terrorists and movement of fighters and money, but they're looking at demographics, they're looking at economics, they're looking at poor governance, and the way, if you look forward years, that will have an effect on stability and the type of missions, military, diplomatic, and otherwise, that we'll have to contend with.
You know, though, I didn't get a feeling, and maybe that's my own lack of understanding, but
Not likely.
I didn't get a feeling of security when I listened to him last night. There are so many open ends and so much left to just projection, concepts, ideas, creative, whatever. No concrete judgment that says, we're going to do this and we're going to be safe.
Well, part of it is that, you know, he can't give us the classified parts. He can't tell us what we're doing and where we're doing and how we're doing. What he wanted to do was to create this appreciation for how they see the world, the nature of the threats, how complicated they are, how interrelated they are, and how threats can be things that even we're not thinking about on a daily basis. I mean, demographics, refugee flows, the fact that more and more people are leaving rural areas and moving into urban areas without the support to be able to provide them the life they need, and that can breed extremism. These are the things they're thinking about. don't worry, they are doing plenty about them too. The fact that he can't brief us on that too doesn't mean they're not doing good
Yeah,
things.
but it's a big concern because of the unrest in the Middle East and all the confusion. There's a lot of immigration, and there are people, masses of people coming out of Syria,
Right.
Lebanon. How are they dealing with this kind of conflict? Because they bring with them their own culture and their own concerns and their own periods of unrest. And they create an unrest in the communities and countries that take them in. Isn't that true?
It's absolutely true. The things he's pointing out here are longer range projections. What you're talking about are in the immediate
Tomorrow.
and these sharp refugee flows. Look, the fifth largest city in Jordan right now is a tent city. You have a huge number of Syrian Sunni refugees moving into Lebanon, changing the nature of the sectarian balance in this state divided between Shia, Sunni, Druze, Christian Maronites. These are huge population shifts with massive repercussions. One of the many reasons we at the Washington Institute have our hands full.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I don't even know how you get your arms around something like this. And yet they say that the calm and the peace and the tranquility in the Middle East is really based on the peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. This kind of red line that if we don't get straightened out, this is going to continue. And if we do, a miracle is going to take place. Do you believe that?
I believe we should be trying to pursue an Israeli-Palestinian peace for the right reasons. Those are not the right reasons. If there is no peace tomorrow, that doesn't mean the world is going to fall apart. And if there is a peace in the near term, may it happen, that doesn't mean that all our other troubles are going to fade away. That's wishful thinking. We should be wanting to secure peace, a real peace if it's possible. Why? Because Israelis and Palestinians both are suffering, because it's a real human tragedy, because there's security needed for Israel and security needed for Palestinians. If that can be achieved, great. If it can't be achieved in full, what can we do in the interim to make things better? But this idea that it's all or nothing, and that if we don't have a peace process, that is the reason for all the failures in the region, and that if we do have a peace process, all these things will go away, that's just naivete.
Well, that's how I feel. And there's no security in these negotiations. They can go on forever and ever and ever. We also have a situation in Iran, which is critical because the United States, along with several other countries, signed this agreement, and I think it's been said that it's diminished in the eyes of the world, the United States' capacity for really any kind of control.
Look, there's a lot of concern about this joint action plan, as it is called, this interim agreement.
Right.
The reason I think, though, that people are in the region are sensing a less dominant America in the region is not just because of this. It's because of our, frankly, weak positions that we've had in Syria, in Egypt. At first, we promoted democracy and stopped supporting Mubarak, but then we didn't really do very much, or we weren't very vocal, and a Muslim Brotherhood government came to power. And now the Muslim Brotherhood government has been removed, and there's a military government, and we've withdrawn our financial support. In Syria, we delayed acting because things weren't bad enough, and now they are much, much worse, and some of the things that we'd wanted to do simply won't work anymore. Yeah. The president issued a red line, it was crossed, and nothing was done, as some see it. These are the types of things, together with negotiating with Iran, that leaves the Saudis and others thinking that maybe we're taking a step back in the region and showing some weakness. There are a lot of problems, I think, with this joint action plan, but ultimately the proof is going to be in the pudding of whatever the final agreement is. In that final agreement, there have to be certain thresholds. Personally, I think it has to include Iran not being able to enrich uranium. That's not apparently the direction that we're going in right now, and that gives me concerns because the Iranians have been deceptive and they have cheated on this in their reports to the international community, to the IAEA, the UN watchdog. I just don't feel that we can trust them with enrichment, let them be involved in enrichment activities in Switzerland or somewhere else. We'll see how this goes. Many people say the Israelis are against this. It's actually not true. The Israelis have been very, very clear. They'd be in favor of a good deal. But this is one of those few areas in life where there's no gray area. There's a black and white. There's going to be a good deal or not a good deal. And I think what a lot of people are worried about is that we'll get a close deal, a good enough deal, and maybe agree to it, and that would be dangerous.
You know, one of the jobs, of what I understand, of the Washington Institute is to monitor this and make sure that the information that comes out is credible.
Exactly. So, you know, the Joint Action Plan comes out. We immediately do a tremendous amount of analysis. What's in the deal? What exactly does it say? There's a lot of misunderstanding. What does it mean when the White House puts its understanding of the deal on its website, and then within hours the Iranian government says, no, that's not our understanding of it. Right. Look, most people don't understand this Joint Action Plan, which is supposed to be a 6-month plan. It hasn't started yet. Yeah. The clock hasn't even started ticking yet. So there's lots of things that need to be put out there, analysis, advice, and advice that's not partisan, that doesn't come from an ideological perspective. This is just research-based. This is just, you know, from research and study and discussion with people on all sides of every aisle, here and abroad, trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward and giving sound policy advice.
Yeah. On that note, we'll take a break. We'll be back with the remainder of our program right after this brief message.
Our Jewish Federation has accomplished so much, and still needs keep growing. You can help us do even more. Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together. Federation and our overseas partners support the resurgence of Jewish life in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. We also provide humanitarian assistance wherever Jews encounter poverty and crisis. Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
Welcome back to Mosaic. Prior to the break, we were talking about the instability of the world in general, and which is a subject I hope someday we will never have to talk about. But meanwhile, you wrote a book.
I did.
The Hezbollah, the global footprint of Lebanon's Party of God. It's an incredible book.
Thank you.
It must have taken you, I would say, 10 years?
Just about. Just about.
Wow. First of all, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, to make a long story short, I had left the FBI. It was before I went back into government. Later on, I was at the Washington Institute then, as I am now again. And I got invited to a U.S. government conference in Washington all about Lebanon. And all of the speakers that were brought in from Lebanon who talked about Hezbollah talked about it only as a political group, which it is, only as a social welfare group, which it is, or a militia. It is all of those things in Lebanon and more. But for none of them was there any credence to what they considered to be rumors that Hezbollah had engaged in any activity abroad, not terrorist activity, fundraising, criminal activity, logistics, arms procurement, none of it. One person even insisted that the attacks that we know Hezbollah has carried out abroad, say the bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in '92, or the Amia Jewish Community Center on the cover of the book in 1994, oh, that was just Al-Qaeda. This was a conference that was sponsored by the U.S. government, and I just thought to myself, how is it possible that these weren't conspiracy theorists? And I did a literature review, or really my research assistant did, and it turned out there was a huge literature out there on Hezbollah, but almost none of it covered anything but Hezbollah's activities, political, social, militia in Lebanon. There was no literature of any significance outside the intelligence community, outside the classified realm on this. So I wrote a book, not about Hezbollah in Lebanon, because there's already lots of literature on that. It's not to say that there are not lots of things in Lebanon, they are. But if you want to really understand them, you have to understand the full scope of their activities. This takes us to North and South America, to Europe, to the Middle East, to Africa, to Southeast Asia. And you find that over the years, continuing to today, Hezbollah has been active around the globe.
This is the scariest book.
Thank you.
No, it's frightening. I had no idea the extent of their efforts. I really didn't. First of all, I read something that I found fascinating, the fact that Ehud Barak, when he entered Lebanon, he claims that was the beginning of the Party of God.
Well, it's an acknowledgement that before the Israeli invasion, Hezbollah wasn't there.
Right.
The Israeli invasion alone did not create Hezbollah. There was already a dynamic going on. There were multiple militant Shia groups in Lebanon that were frankly fighting with each other as much as anybody else. And the Iranians, in the first few years after the 1979 revolution, and especially after the Israeli invasion in 82, sent in 1,500 Quds Force officers to the Bekaa Valley to coalesce these groups together under an umbrella that they called Hizb-Allah, the Party of God. This umbrella became much more formal, became a very highly structured organization that we now know today. And while it's true, as you read in the book, that Hezbollah is active around the world, it's not that it has these huge networks and these tentacles and sleeper cells, these silly terms that you'll see in the movies. They do have supporters around the world. They do have sympathizers, and they have a small number of operatives who have done and continue sometimes to try and do, as we saw most recently when they killed 6 people and injured dozens more in Burgas, Bulgaria, of all places, real around the world.
Yeah, you just came back from Bulgaria.
I was in Bulgaria a few months ago, yeah.
Yeah, and their life and their geopolitical situation is upside down at this point.
Well, there's lots of different things happening in Bulgaria. One is that they're contending with a massive terrorist attack for the first time ever. Hezbollah killed a European citizen, a Bulgarian citizen, in this attack. It's one of the main things that led the European Union a few months later this past summer to ban the military and terrorist wings of Hezbollah. But Bulgaria is also suffering from other aspects of what's going on in the Middle East. Hezbollah is fighting on behalf of the Assad regime in Syria. On the other side, you have Sunnis coming from around the world, in particular from Europe, to go and fight there, coming back home with skills. And then on top of all of that, you have the refugee problem that we talked about in the first segment. And one of the ways people are trying to sneak into Europe is by going into Turkey and then crossing into Bulgaria, where the border crossings are pretty lax. And then once you're in Bulgaria, you're within the European Union. Then you can go anywhere. And it's a small country. They only have about 8,000 Syrian refugees there, but that's a large number for a small country like Bulgaria, the poorest country within the EU.
You know, it's interesting. We think in this country, from a cultural standpoint, that if you have a democracy, what a democracy is to us has no correlation whatsoever to what a democracy is in the Middle East. If they have an election, no matter what, they think that's a democracy. Am I correct?
You are. I'd even make it stronger. I think that many of those places aren't particularly interested in true democracy the way we have it. And because we in the West tend to mistake elections for democracy, we don't spend the time, because it's not as exciting, it's not as sexy as an election, to actually build slowly and carefully over time civil society. If you have civil society and you put elections on top of that, you can have more than one man, one vote, one time. And if you don't, then you will have elections where Hamas will win in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 2006, where the Muslim Brotherhood will win in Egypt, where Hezbollah will win in Lebanon, because you haven't built civil society where true moderates, religious or secular, can honestly compete.
Okay, the Washington Institute gets all the information out, advises the people that can hopefully do something about it in government. What really can be done about it?
Well, the good news is there's always great things that can be done
See, I
for
like
all the different.
I like a positive attitude here. I mean, I have to be able to sleep tonight, and so do my viewers. So, explain what good is going to come out of this.
Well, all I can tell you is that there are good policy options out there. Sometimes they're made more difficult by bad decisions that have been made in the past. In Syria, for example, things are very, very messy right now. We have fewer policy options today than we did before, but there's always policy options. You can sit there wringing your hands, or you can try and think up smart ways to move forward, and that's what the Washington Institute is all about. You just can't give up. This is the world we live in. We care about it. We care about U.S. policy in the region. We care about the standing of the United States in the world. This is an American think tank with an American agenda. So it's incumbent upon us to think about smart ways to pursue our agendas everywhere from Iran and Turkey and North Africa and everywhere in between, to secure the region, to secure U.S. interests in the region and U.S. interests more broadly.
Well, I like that. I mean, I really do. That's why
Then my job here is done.
No, it's not done yet. You've got a lot to do. One of the examples you explained last night in your address was about something so simple that could have been done by changing a road.
Well, this was
Just a simple road. Explain what I'm talking about.
Well, you're talking about one of two different things I can't remember. One is, we were talking at one point about the peace process.
Right.
And my colleague Dave Makovsky did a phenomenal study of maps of the West Bank.
Right.
And it turns out, and you can find the study on our website, washingtoninstitute.org, with all of the interactive maps. If you were to move the border, the line, move not one person, Israeli or Palestinian, just move the line separating Israel and the West Bank, 4 or 5%. Equal land swaps, equal quality of land. So nobody ends up gaining or losing. Not an inch overall, not good land for bad land. What you could end up doing is moving the border such that 80% of the settler population would now be within Israel proper. Or look at it from the Palestinian perspective, 80% of the settler population will be removed. The West Bank is still the same size, just slightly different borders. Contiguity, the whole bit. This would be a really positive step for both sides. An Israeli leader could say 80% of the people who were settlers yesterday are not today. Build to your heart's content. And a Palestinian leader could say, look, for us Palestinians, the number one issue is the idea of settlement, that land is being, as we see it, expropriated, that we're trying to negotiate over, and I just solved 80% of that problem. We need to think about ways to do things that get us closer to where we want to be. You'd have to be able to convince the Palestinians that this would be not the last step, it'd be part of a step, but fine, there are things we could do. Another example we talked about last night is when the U.S. government was still thinking about taking military action against Syria after the Assad regime used chemical weapons and crossed the president's red line about using chemical weapons, there were some things we could have done that would have made a real difference and wouldn't have seemed to have been out of proportion or too escalatory. For example, there are only a certain number of runways capable of taking the heavy airplanes that fly weapons and other supplies into the country. We have specialized munitions to take out just those types of runways. That would have been an action that would have had very likely very small, if any, unintended casualties. And the day after would have had an impact because we would have made it much more difficult for Iran and Russia to send all these weapons into the Assad regime to arm the Assad regime and Hezbollah in fighting the rebels.
See, what I'm saying, there are ways to do things. Somebody better do it, and Matt Levitt, it's up to you.
Oh my. All right, here we go.
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
My pleasure. And thank you for being with us as well. Be with us again next week when we have another look into the Jewish world. Goodbye from Mosaic.